Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy early start to this Sunday macro morning over here. Today, a big one, as I wanted to go over some extremely higher term time frame ideas that incorporate both the bullish outlook and the bearish outlook, so that I can then hand over the keys to you and you can decide for yourself what's relevant, what's not, and then, well, make your own plans according to that and your own due diligence, of course. Other than that, I wanted to make a quick little announcement as well. As over the past year, I've actually been planning on having a more intimate, small group type of environment where we do a few live streams per week. In fact, it'll be 3 live streams per week, and then Discord support as well. So it'll be more of like an intimate community in that regard. I'll also be joined by actually Zach of the Trade Network, if you're familiar with him. Great guy, comes from a bit of a different background, but we've been planning to do this for a while now, and I suspect that once we get into the beginning of 2023, we'll be able to go live with this. So I just wanted to give you a quick heads up on that. More information will probably come out maybe later this week, probably next week, something like that will make most sense, and then we'll go onwards and forwards from there. All right, sweet. So let's jump right on into it. And so I wanted to start off with the bearish things. Like if you put a gun on my head and say, Krown, find me the most bearish fucking chart for Bitcoin and why you should be looking, and why you should throw all hope aside. Well, I would say, sir, take the gun away from my head and look no further than this chart right here. This is the yearly chart for Bitcoin. This is a 12-month chart, of which obviously we really don't have that much data for it. So I want to provide a major counterpoint to what I'm going to be looking at right here. But yes, there's not that much data from this because Bitcoin's only been around for 12 to 13 years now. And realistically, we want to see 20 to 30, maybe even 40 years before we really start to look at things like this on the yearly. But if you wanted the most bearish outlook on Bitcoin, I would point you towards the yearly chart, as Bitcoin does have its first reversal actually in play here with a nice shooting star dildo that we did see coming in from 2021. And then more importantly, it looks like Bitcoin will very likely confirm below the low of the prior yearly, and that would be a bit of a reversal there. So long term, has Bitcoin seen highs for a while? Very likely, yes. Even the biggest of bullahs, I do think, would probably agree that even if you're super bullish, you think that the lows and you think that Bitcoin is primed for upside, you're probably still looking at multiple years before new highs are ever reached, if that even happens at all. I happen to be of the opinion that it probably will. It's more or less a question of time. But in this case right here, yes, we do have a reversal in place. And if you're asking probably price action traders, I mean, they're going to be saying, yeah, based off this chart, probably looking somewhere between 8,000 to 4,000. Personally speaking, I don't think that's what's happening. But if you wanted the most the most neutral analysis on this is what I show you right here. The 12-month chart doesn't really need to be anything more crazy than that, especially as we come into the last couple of weeks of December. Anyways, moving on from there, I wanted to go over to this chart, this one a little bit more statistically based, as it is going to be a 2-day time frame analysis. Volatility versus stochastic momentum in this case. Volatility represented by the BBWP indicator, and basically anytime that we have seen it contract to extreme lows, which are defined as anything 10 percentile or lower on the 2-day time frame, the expansion phase that naturally follows that has led to an average move of how much? 35% done over the course of about 3 weeks or so. And the stochastic oscillator has been correct in getting the direction of that volatility expansion 84.5% of the time. The reason why that's relevant, because as of right now, the 2-day time frame will be closing, I believe, tonight. Yes, indeed it will. And it will freshly cross the downside with any sort of a closure today below 17,650. So these are the results over the past little over 4 years now, going on 5 years. So what essentially would that suggest? Well, while volatility is fully contracted like this, it would suggest that the next move to the downside is more probable in this case. I mean, 84.5% is, I would say, rather high. Of course, it's not 100% in that regard. And if we were to measure this one out, I would actually measure it from the prior high from this signal given. And if we were to go for, let's say, the average move, basically 35%, well, I need to actually adjust this a bit so we can get it properly. But to give you an idea of where that would kind of land Bitcoin, that would put Bitcoin actually at about $11,500. I also took a first standard deviation measurement of this, and we do have a range between about 25.5% all up to 44%. So again, that's kind of where we expect the majority of the results to fall between. Even 25% from the last high at about $18,500 would put Bitcoin just below $14,000. So, do keep that in mind. That's kind of what's at stake. I guess if you are looking for downside from here, personally speaking, I do think that Bitcoin could very easily retest the current lows that we've seen over the past couple of months, which I guess would be, the November lows basically. But personally speaking, I actually do think that Bitcoin will hold those lows. I'll explain why later. But yes, if I'm looking for, other sort of impetuses for more downside, this would be a part of that. Again, it does, of course, rely on the actual expansion of volatility on the 2-day time frame. So in this case, I define expansion of volatility as getting back above the threshold at 10 percentile, and then, both the BBWP and its moving average having positive slopes, which right now, none of those three conditions is available. So fair enough. But yes, the 2-day stochastic oscillator crossing down, which will cross down as long as Bitcoin's below 17,650 at the end of today. That would certainly be, let's say, putting the odds in favor of downside from here. Let's see. Okay, so what's the next thing that we can look at? Well, the next thing that we can look at is over here. Where is it? Oh, it's over here. There we go. We can go over to the dollar index, symbol DXY, Dixie, as it's colloquially known, and on the daily, and this is going to be very different than the other timeframes, but on the daily specifically, there are several signals of a bounce. We do see that the daily RSI is putting in major drives of bullish divergence, actually 4 drives going on right now, it looks like, and the daily jewel is actually about to get a pretty damn good upside signal as well. So I do suspect that this one will pop back up somewhere around $105.5, very, very likely if things get super fucking crazy. Maybe even as much as 107.5, but ultimately that would suggest that the short term likely does pop up here into the end of the year. So what does that essentially mean? Well, we do expect on the higher term time frame trends that this will have an inverse relationship with risk on assets, which Bitcoin is obviously included in that. Again, I want to definitely uninvite myself from the conversation where people start to look at this on a fucking 5-minute time frame or an hourly or basically anything below a daily for that matter, and even a daily is kind of low. Those sort of inverse correlations I do not find worthwhile, do not find viable. But in this case, as far as the higher term time frame trend goes, yes, there certainly has been a nice inverse relationship between between Dixie and risk on assets like Bitcoin. So that would also put downwards pressure on price action. And then the next thing, which is not necessarily bearish just yet, but I do think that it's relevant, would be the weekly stochastic oscillator. So this one's kind of more neutral as of right now, but seen as the weekly is closing today, so it'll be closing today at, I believe, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, well, the weekly stochastic oscillator could actually continue with downside momentum if Bitcoin does close this weekly below 16,635, which right now it's about, $5,200 above. Depending upon, when you actually look at it. But if you do see Bitcoin close below that threshold on the weekly, very likely we will see at least another retest of the current lows, maybe lower, and maybe the other charts do start to take over after that point. All right, cool. So that's probably the heaviest hitting things that I would be looking at for the bearish side. And now we can get into the slightly neutral things, and then we'll get into the bullish things. So the neutral things would be the daily HPDR ranges here. So of course the daily HPDR ranges, they don't really change all that often, being that it is a daily, but ultimately it has been incredibly accurate in getting the ranges, if you will, especially within the 50% blue range, historical in the blue range. That's what I'm trying to say. The 50% historical returns range. Anyways, you can see that last week, Bitcoin, or was this last week? This was last week on Wednesday. Bitcoin was rejected at the top side of the blue range. That's to be expected, obviously. What was not necessarily expected from that was to actually fall back down below the lights out line, which was at the time about 17,500. That was the big one. At this point, you can see that, yes, it is still operating rather interesting here. And of course, the bottom side of this would be at about 15,800. So that's what I guess that's essentially where I'd be looking for if Bitcoin is going to retest the weekly range lows. Somewhere around 15.8, maybe gets a wick a little bit lower than that ultimately, but very likely a bounce emerges from that region. region. And again, that would be viable. And because today is not really like a higher term time frame, or sorry, a low term time frame day, that would very likely be viable if we do see, higher term time frame closures below about 16,600, 16,650 or so. Then I suppose, yeah, I'd be looking somewhere down around there. Probably a few bounces along the way as usual, but ultimately probably finds its way somewhere down around there. All right, cool. So now we can get into the bullish things. And I'll actually start it off here. We mentioned this one last week. This is the net unrealized profit and loss entity adjusted long-term hold. And this one was tweeted out by Charles Edwards. He's great on Twitter. He's one of the only fundamental guys that I think actually even has a fucking clue. Not to like talk specifically shit about anyone else, but we can see that from a fundamentally, on-chain based perspective, we are starting to see historical regions where long-term, lows have been, macro lows have been put in, and in this case, while it's not like fully down here on the NUPL, it's it's within the vicinity basically, and you probably can see that there have been higher lows over the full course history of Bitcoin. So looking for a low kind of around this current region would be relevant perhaps. We can also, because this hasn't updated, and this was a tweet from like a couple weeks ago, we can actually go look at the current NUPL arrangements over here on the market data tab on the Krown Trading application. You can get all this data, by the way, for free. Go over here to the indicators, and we can go zero in on the NUPL right here. The old NUPL, huh? Currently, it is negative 0.19. Okay, so what does that mean within the grand scheme of things? Well, that means that we're even lower than when this than when this picture was tweeted out. That threshold was at 0.3, so it is actually, I would say, significantly lower as of right now. So it's becoming, it's like a deep value region, which, as he denoted over here, pretty fucking rare. I mean, it's really only happened a few times in Bitcoin's history. Anyways, moving on to the next one, another tweet by Charles Edwards. In this case, he's actually, I think he's actually retweeting Dilution Proof, who I'm not as familiar with, but I followed him. He seems good. And again, another fundamentally based analysis here, or sorry, not fundamentally based, but on-chain based analysis. This is the market value to realized value chart, and what it shows is that we're basically at the same point, if you were to relate this cycle to all prior cycles, where macro lows have been put in. Pretty fucking interesting. As far as timing goes, you can see right here, it's zeroed in on the actual reversal for the prior two cycles. And in this case, the current, the current cycle, if you can call it that, is, well, popping off those regions. So that would be, again, more on the bullish side of things. I thought this one was rather interesting, especially paired with the prior chart and some of the other things that we'll be looking at in a second here. Anyways, moving on to the next one. The next one is more kind of midterm. I wouldn't say bullish, but it's suggesting that we very likely see a rally off the current lows before anything else. And this is the weekly accumulation and distribution indicator chart right here. So this one, again, a little bit more on the fundamental side, kind of. It is technically a technical, or a tentacle, who the fuck knows what that means. But over the full history of Bitcoin, anytime that we have seen this indicator, the accumulation and distribution indicator, get down towards the green horizontal bar, that is when these green vertical bars have been plotted on the charts. And as you can see, they've all been basically around major turning points on Bitcoin. And at least major turning points, in some cases macro lows, and at least some pretty impressive bounces. So to put this into context, I've measured all of the prior bounces based off of that signature in the past. The average gain was about 49%, a little bit over that. And the time taken from that setup given to the next major high was about 70 days. Now, I did take a first standard deviation measurement for this one as well. But as you can see, Bitcoin got down to that level more recently on the November dump. So in that case, it would still suggest that Bitcoin likely bounces higher out of this range before potentially going lower later. This is not a macro bottom call, because they haven't all been macro bottoms in the past. They've been major bottoms, certainly, yes, before big rallies, but not the same thing as a macro low. So it would suggest that Bitcoin, again, can very easily come back down and retest the current lows, but also very likely does trade, very likely does bounce greater than those lows before potentially going lower later. To put this into perspective, even the bottom side of the first standard deviation, which is close to 40%, would put Bitcoin, in the very low $20,000 territory. The average would put Bitcoin at around like 21.5 to 22,000 bucks, and so on and so forth. So again, I do hold reservation that even if Bitcoin does have significantly more downside to go, maybe into 2023, it probably tries for a greater bounce off of these major lows first. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Let's see, just checking my list over here. Yeah, let's go over here. Let's go reference, I think it's on this chart. Yeah, this chart right here. So if we go to the two-week time frame for the Joule, what I've done is I've marked off all of the times that the 2-week Joule has gotten down to this specific level, and then turned white, very specific right there. And as you can see, it's only happened 3 times in the past besides the current iteration, and those 3 times have effectively been macro lows, actually almost to the T, not exactly to the T, but very, very close to it. In fact, it gets it a little bit after the actual low is printed, over here, about a couple months after the actual low, or a month and a half after the actual low. So in this case, we're getting another one of these setups over here. That's also why I do say that, is Bitcoin more likely to bounce here than not? Probably yes. Do we have any sort of bullish divergence building on the bi-weekly RSI? Kind of, but I don't really trust that one as of right now. Also, if we were to go to the monthly is interesting because it also does have a similar level like this on the monthly Joule. You can see it's kind of coming into similar regions where it has put in lows in before, although this particular one has not turned white just yet, so that is not a signal. Anyways, the monthly RSI, however, is building hidden bullish divergence between the last macro lows and the potential current ones. Now, why do I say this? Well, the monthly RSI is significantly lower than the lows that you saw even in December and even in March of 2020. The fuck am I saying? 2020! Jesus Christ, man. Yes, so hidden bullish divergence will be available there. Problem is that low is, about 6,500 bucks on a fucking closing basis. So a lot of space to fill out between there and here. So not very helpful, but make of that, as you will. Moving on to the next one, we can go over to the monthly for stochastic momentum over here. And on the monthly for stochastic momentum, it's, well, how do I make this bullish? Well, one, you can see that there is a bit of a regression trend line going in from all of the prior macro lows. Again, this one does not time them specifically, but it does get the momentum play after the lows are in. So months after the lows are in. And the monthly stochastic oscillator is currently on that point. Problem is, in order to actually flip it back onto the upside, Bitcoin needs to close this month, December, above 19,600, which right now it's pretty fucking far away. So I'd say unlikely, but hey, we've all seen crazier things in 2 weeks than a $3,000 rally. So possible, maybe not the most probable at this exact moment. So I thought that was also interesting. And then what else? Yes. Okay. So we got that. Yes. The next one I want to get into is actually the monthly look for Dixie. So we looked at the daily before. The daily very likely showing a bounce. The monthly, however, and even the weekly for that matter, does show the same thing. A bounce right here, but very likely further down south over time. Very, very likely down between somewhere at least between about a 101 to 102. If things really get crazy, maybe even down to 97, 98 region long term. I mean, this is obviously a monthly. This is not happening anytime soon, but that would probably help out the long-term case for some risk on assets. But kind of to look at it from this perspective right here, I'd be looking for a bounce here, boom, and then something like that. On the monthly RSI. Again, monthly RSI does have regular bearish divergence going in from the highs that it did witness back in April 2015. So, and you're actually, now that I recognize it, oh, sorry, no, wait, is it? Oh, okay, yes, I apologize. I am seeing things at this moment. Maybe just drawing some magical lines yet again. But ultimately, short-term bounce, long-term very likely does have some more downside. We're also going to witness volatility contraction, very, very likely for the first time, from these levels since actually 2015 as well. What else do we have? I think that is actually, yeah, I think that's actually it. So hopefully I provided a bit more of a nuanced and balanced view of this asset. We didn't go over anything in the short-term timeframes, basically the same shit as yesterday. As you probably noticed, very little has actually happened since yesterday to today. But the overall lights out line still very, 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 very important right here. So ultimately, those are the things that I'm looking at. I'll hand over the keys to you, find what's relevant, find what's not relevant, and then make it your own, of course, as always. Other than that, I'll leave you with this chart over here. Again, I think this is just, the most obvious one for the daily as of right now. All right, cool. It's a good place for me to be leaving off. I want to be wishing you the best as always. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully soon.